thanks to Justin and other members of the NSTA for inviting me to talk about the Dystonia Coalition. Some of you probably know that I actually worked in this region. I was up the street at Hopkins for about 12 years where I ran the Dystonia clinic there, and I just moved to Emory about 2 years ago, so I noticed a lot of familiar faces here in the audience. So it's nice to see you all again. What I have been asked to talk about is a new research initiative called the Dystonia Coalition. And that's what I'm going to cover today. So just by way of background, I started in the area of research, mainly studying genetics and molecular and cellular pathways, focusing on specific types of dystonia. And over the years, I got more and more interested in trying to understand how the particular hard to find and hard to study is true. So when I first got interested in looking across the dystonias for common pathways, common themes that really would help broader groups of people, I discovered it was kind of hard to do. And the reason for that is, although dystonia is maybe not so rare, each individual subtype is actually fairly uncommon. And it's hard to collect very large numbers of patients to do meaningful studies, at least quickly. Some people have done that in various centers, but one always gets the impression that studies done from a single study center often are a little bit biased by the kinds of patients who go to those centers. And so this really became a big challenge. How do you figure out what you have learned in your studies of one particular kind of dystonia are relevant to the others? So about 2 or 3 years ago, I started looking, say, at cervical dystonia population. I was particularly interested in the head tremor, what it means, where it comes from in the brain. I mean, lots of people have it. Not a whole lot of people pay a whole lot of research attention to it. So I thought this was a good thing to look at. And it took me about 6 months, and we recruited about 18 patients for our study, and we studied their tremor very, very carefully. The problem is I needed 100. And so you get the idea, if it takes you 6 months to get 18 patients, you can do the math and figure out if you want 100 patients, it's going to take you a long time. So I started looking around at friends and collaborators who did similar kinds of research, and everybody had the same problem. That is, everybody wanted to look at their patient population, but they just didn't have enough patients to study in any one spot, and it became very, very difficult to do anything very quickly. So this is really how the Dystonia Coalition got born. We have a problem that is not unusual. So there are other rare diseases out there in the world, and there's an office at the NIH called the Office of Rare Disease Research, who recognizes that rare diseases are hard to study because they're so scattered all over the place, and it's hard to get a lot of folks together for studies. And so they developed this grant program for rare diseases, which was kind of interesting. Instead of giving an individual investigator a bunch of money to do the studies that he or she wants to do, what they did is said, no, we're not going to give anybody money. What we want you to do is we want you to pool a whole load of investigators and show us that you're willing to work together and you're willing to cooperate, and then we'll give you a lot of money. And so this is what we did. And a few years back, we put together this proposal, and we started out with 18 centers who believed in this mission of cooperation rather than competition. And that was about 2 years ago, and by now we have over 40. And I think it's a big sign to us that there's lots of investigators out there who do want to do research in dystonia. Some of these folks I never knew from before, and it turns out when they send their lists of how many patients with different kinds of dystonia they have, there's a pretty enormous number of patients, but they just didn't really know how to put together studies with what they had. So that's the background to where this program came from. And let me just run through very briefly what's in it. So I mentioned earlier that our sponsors are the Office of Rare Disease Research at the NIH and also the National Institutes of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. And the name of the grant that they often cite is a big long number, which means nothing to us, but some people like to know what that is. But our sponsorship goes beyond these two governmental agencies. When we first put together this plan and proposal, and we said we wanted to get a bunch of people to work together to study dystonia, we also went to all of the foundations in the States that had dystonia programs. And everybody was very enthusiastic about it. We got letters from pretty much every foundation that said that they thought this was a good thing to do and that they would help and they would come together and cooperate to help make this happen. So we have the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation, the Bachman Strauss Foundation, Benign Essential Blood for Spasm, Tyler's Hope, of course NSTA, ADS, Dystonia Inc., We Move, and NSDA. Each of these focuses a little bit on a different kind of focal dystonia that Mark Hallett reviewed earlier on for you. Some focus on mainly eyes, the blood for spasm group. For example, this group focuses mainly on generalized dystonia of children, the voice, and of course the neck and spasmodic verticalis. So it was really nice to have help from all these people. I think Justin wrote us a letter for the original proposal. Thank you very much. It worked. And it was nice to have everybody on board to agree that this needed to happen. And our mission is fairly simple. It's listed here. It's to advance the pace of clinical and translational research into dystonias to find better treatments and a cure. Okay, so I mentioned to you earlier that we started out with 18 centers and we're now over 40. This shows a distribution of where they are. Most of them are in North America. There's a few here in Canada and Europe. We kind of have an open program where anybody who wants to participate in the studies, all they have to do is call us up, tell us what their credentials are, and they're eligible to participate in any of the studies that get organized by our group. So it's nice in that it doesn't really require a special membership fee or any other type of barrier to getting involved. So at our first meeting, which was in Washington, D.C. about a year ago, the group that showed up was this group here. I think, Justin, I believe that's you right there, sitting here in the back row.
Yeah,
I'm sure some of you may recognize some other folks here, but it was a great meeting, and what we did with that meeting was we brought together a bunch of people, mostly from North America, some from Europe, and we told them what it is we thought we needed to do in terms of our research program. We got together a bunch of plans for what those studies should be like, and we put them out there in the group and got some feedback about how those plans would work and how they should be changed. And over the past year, what we've done is sort of set some of those plans in motion. So what I want to tell you next is what those plans are. So we have 3 big clinical research projects that we have agreed to take on. And then we have some other components. There's a career development program, what we call a pilot projects program, and a data management center. So what I want to do is tell you about each one of these steps here, because some of them are quite relevant to patients with dystonia, because we may need your help. Okay, so the first study is what we call a natural history study linked with a biorepository. So what does that mean? Well, a natural history study is basically a study that looks at people and their problems and follows them every year and sees how things change. You know, it's amazing that dystonia has been known for really a very, very long time, many decades. There's no prospectively designed natural history study for any of the focal dystonias of any meaningful size. We actually think we know how it evolves over time. Mark Hallett said evolution occurs in the first 5 years and then it stops, and then there's studies saying, no, it can evolve for longer. So it's amazing that we don't actually know how it evolves very carefully. And so what we decided to do was a natural history study where we take patients with all of the different kinds of focal dystonias. We carefully evaluate them at any one of those centers, and we keep track of how things go over time. The natural history study is not devoted just to the movement disorder. So we all can see the movement disorder. It's very easy. But it's also going to cover some things that are not so easy to see. Many of our patient advocacy groups came back to us and told us, you know, one of the things that you neurologists miss all the time, because you're a neurologist, is that a lot of us have trouble with anxiety-related problems or depression, or we just don't like the way it affects our lives, and you don't really pay attention to that. And so one of the things we added to this study was not just looking at the movement disorder, but also all the psychiatric and psychological comorbidities, as well as how the disorder influences your quality of life over the years. Because this is what's important to people, not just whether the head is not perfectly straight or wobbling back and forth, which is what the neurologist usually focuses on. So we're going to address a lot of things in the natural history study. this study is actually being organized by this guy, Joel Perlmutter at Washington University in St. Louis. I told you about the natural history study. What's the biorepository? So a biorepository is basically a bank for specimens from people. So blood, DNA, skin cells, that kind of thing. And the reason that is important is because we need those materials from people who have dystonia so that we can look for things in the blood, in the DNA, that may be responsible. Mark Hallett talked a little bit earlier about genetics of dystonia, and one of the reasons that we've had progress move so slowly in that arena is because it has been difficult to collect that 1,000 or 2,000 patients that he said we need. Well, that's one of our jobs. We're going to be trying to put together a big biorepository for DNA for all of the focal dystonias that we know of. And so this is something that we really need your help with. The researchers can't do it on their own. What we need is we need people who are willing to go in and be checked once a year by their doctor. And to maybe give a blood sample so that we can put it in the bank and we can start looking for genes that go across many people and many different kinds of dystonia. So this is actually a very important study that I think has been a long time in coming. Mark Hallett, I think, said it's been probably 20 years since we started this effort, and we'd like to see it speed up a little bit. All right, so the second project is being led by Cindy Comella at Rush University, and this project has to do with revising something we call the Twister scale. So the Twister scale is a decades-old rating scale that doctors use to measure how bad your dystonia is, and particularly your cervical dystonia. So it measures the tilt and the turn and the movement and the pain. But one of the things that it doesn't really measure very well is tremor. That is that wobbly movement that a lot of people have. So since that is sometimes a major problem for patients, and that's the thing that bothers them the most, what we decided we needed to do is revise this scale so that it includes tremor in a way that captures what cervical dystonia. Okay, so in 2010 we picked 2 awards that we thought were the best, and these actually haven't been formally announced. The owners of the grants know they're getting money, but they haven't been formally announced to the rest of the community. One of them had to do with looking at DYT6, which is a genetic form of dystonia, and trying to compare patients with DYT6 dystonia to patients with cervical dystonia and laryngeal dystonia, both clinically and physiologically, to find out if they are the same or different. So the question here is this a genetic form of dystonia a good model for the more common focal, sporadic, non-genetic forms that we deal with in dystonia? And it's a very important question to address because if they are good models, then studying this particular group can help us refine a single type of patient population that has a known cause and not mix in people with a lot of unknown causes and try and figure out what makes them common. Another project that we funded had to do with cortical plasticity and the cerebellum in focal dystonias, and this is a project from Emmanuel Rose in France. And this project really addresses an emerging topic that seems to be indicating that the basal ganglia is probably not the only region in the brain where dystonia comes from. There is a series of recent studies, in fact a series of older studies, going back now for decades, showing that the basal ganglia may be among the most common regions affected in patients with dystonia, but they're not the only ones. And maybe we need to start looking at some of these other brain regions. And this is the focus of this project here, to find out how much importance we should be putting on the cerebellum. And I think this came up a couple of times in Dr. Hallett's presentation earlier. This is one of those regions that shows up on the scans as being not quite right when you look at patients with focal dystonia. Okay, so that's the pilot projects program. We also have another program, and this program is designed to get junior people with good ideas into the field of research in dystonia. So this is always a problem. We need to attract the best researchers from wherever they are to get them involved in research to help the effort of finding better treatments and cure. And so we have a special program designed to identify people, junior people, relatively early on in their careers, where we can give them money to start a project and get going so that they can actually get a foothold in the area. And the primary purpose is to help junior faculty, as I mentioned, but we are also willing to take senior faculty who are willing to be repurposed. So what I mean by that is people may be studying some other disorder, and they get interested in dystonia, and they want to apply their expertise in one region to this new region. And so we also fund folks like that. So the basic plan is we fund 1 or 2 of these awards each year, 5 years, for a total of up to 10 of these. And we have application cycles about once or twice a year, and each award is about $50,000. Again, we expected to get 1 or 2 of these a year, fund 1 or 2, but we ended up getting about 5 or 6 each cycle. And again, once again, very fortunately, one of the patient advocacy groups said, you know what, getting junior people into the field is very important to us. We'll help you with that part. And so we've been able to fund a fair bit more than we would have otherwise. So in the first year, we did actually fund 2, and we're looking for applications for the next round. So how do we review them? Well, this is the review panel down here. I think some of you will recognize this guy here. He's in his military uniform, but that was Mark Hallett from a few years back. And we're looking for good candidates with a good research plan, with a plan that will really help their careers focus on dystonia, not some other disorder, and that they have a good advisor nearby that can help them if they get stuck, and a good environment. And environment here doesn't refer to what's outside. It refers to the academic environment. Do they have a good place to do the kinds of research that they're proposing? So in the first round, we gave an award to Marin Carbon-Carrell. She put together a project which was looking at brain scans in dystonia. And she's actually started that already, and hopefully we'll get some really good results pretty soon. This is funded in concert with the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation. I mentioned to you earlier that we had a partner for this program. And then the title of her project is right here. And she's looking for a specific pattern of abnormalities that you see when the brain is working that will hopefully help us identify certain kinds of dystonia from others and be useful as a marker, maybe for following clinical trials. She is using what we call functional imaging protocols. So it's actually a deoxyglucose type protocol where I won't go too much into the details, but the bottom line is instead of looking at the structure of your brain, what it looks like, it looks at what brain regions are active and inactive. And it can compare regions of the brain and say, well, in this person, this area of the brain is too active, and that might be the source of the problem. Or this area of the brain is not active enough, and that might be the source of the problem. So it's what we call functional imaging. There's a whole class of imaging modalities that fall in that. fMRI is one of them. You're right. Okay. So the second award went to this fellow here, Matthias Rouse. He's from Canada. And what he wanted to do was look at the psychiatric issues in the dystonias. And this is one of these more senior guys who got repurposed. So he's a psychiatrist who was mostly interested in studying pain-related problems in psychiatry. But we got him interested in studying dystonia. And so he has been instrumental in helping us design appropriate psychiatric instruments in getting the proper rating scales and linking them up with the motor scales. And so he's going to be very, very important to us for the Cervical Dystonia project. And this again was funded in concert with the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation. As I mentioned before, we're taking applications very soon for the next round. And we expect to get probably 5 or 6 as we have been getting. And then we usually pick one of those when we're done. Okay. So I told you just now what we are doing. What I need to do is tell you now what we are planning to do. And these are really plans that we're thinking about. We haven't really got a set plan. And so we're still getting input and feedback from community members, from the patient advocacy groups, from our advisors, et cetera, et cetera. And one of those plans is something we touched on earlier this morning, and that is a brain bank. So Dr. Hallett mentioned how hard it is to get brains from people with dystonia, because people don't die from dystonia usually, so their brains are not widely available. Very hard to get them. Very few are out there. I know because I also have tried to find them here in the States, and there are very few of them that can be studied. And so what we're trying to do is put together a plan that helps make this easier for people and their doctors. Well, what do I do if I want to donate my brain? We had that question earlier. Right now, it's a little vague what you should do. Because if you go to your doctor and say, I want to donate my brain for dystonia research, you'll get this, well, that's nice. Call somebody else. So what we want to do is make it easier. Now, the Dystonia Coalition is not going to keep the brains. We're not going to harvest the brains, and we're not going to store them, and we're not actually going to give out the tissue. That needs to be done by a proper brain bank with good neuropathologists. But what we are going to do is we are going to provide the clinical connection. That is, the clinical records that go along with the brain bank. Because the truth is, a brain is useless unless you know what problems the person had during life. And so the clinical records are extremely important. I need to know, for example, if I'm looking at a brain from somebody who had spasmodic torticollis, I need to know which way the chin was turned, because that influences which side of the brain I might be most interested in. And so we're going to collect all the clinical data, and we're going to make a system easy for patients who want to donate their brains, but we're not going to take them. So that's something that's underfoot. We're working on it right now. And for those of you who don't know, this is Homer Simpson and his brain. He probably doesn't need it. He doesn't need it very much. Okay. Another thing that we've been thinking about, and we've been thinking about this largely because we've been asked to think about it, that has to do with a patient registry. So when an investigator or a group of investigators like the Dystonia Coalition comes up with a really good idea for a project that needs to be done, one of the real limiting factors is getting patients in quick enough to do it. And that's not because it's a bad study, it's because patients don't know about it. And they're out being treated by their doctors, they go and they get their 15 or 20-minute session, every 3 or 4 months. We hear about this all the time. But the doctor doesn't necessarily know about our study, or if he or she does, they may or not have the time to talk to you about it and tell you about it. And so one of the things we want to do is set up a registry, which is basically a list of names and diagnoses of patients who have various kinds of dystonia, who want to be kept informed of research opportunities. And this kind of registry is purely voluntary. You can put your name on the list, you can take it off at any time. It is private. Your names are not publicly available to anyone, actually, except the managers of the list in the Dystonia Coalition. And if an investigator in Australia, a bunch of patients for XYZ study, they don't get your names. What we do is we give you the information that there's an investigator somewhere out there who's interested in this disorder, and then you have the opportunity to contact them. So we're not giving out anybody's names or anybody's private information or doctors' diagnoses. So it keeps it private. And we don't plan to use it for commercial marketing. Unfortunately, for my friends in pharmaceutical industries who've asked me for this several times, we just can't make such lists available for that purpose because most patients don't like that. They don't want their names sold to any purpose, really. So it's really private. This is really, really very important for the reason that I told you earlier. It helps to connect patients who have the problems with the researchers who are interested in developing good protocols for studies. It helps speed up the study by getting lots of patients in very quickly so that we don't have to wait for years and years and years like I did waiting 6 months waiting for my 18 patients. And it really provides a nice means to convey study results back to patients. So once the study is completed, we will put a brief blurb on our website that says what the results were so that you don't have to go and track down the researcher or the doctor and say, what happened? My brain got scanned, what was the final outcome of the study? And this is something that I hear about a lot.